This is Carrickfergus, a town of 28,000 on Northern Ireland's Antrim coast. Famous for its Norman castle and seaside views, Carrickfergus is not a place many people would associate with the Troubles. But as you go deeper into the town, entire Protestant housing estates are controlled by the same loyalist paramilitaries. Killers, drug dealers, and extortionists who keep the communities they were once sworn to protect in hand by way of intimidation and fear, while suppressing the right to free speech at any cost. This is Glenn Quinn, a 47-year-old barman who moved into Carrickfergus's Woodburn estate in 2019. Despite having a terminal disease and less than 2 years to live, Glenn was funny, charismatic, and thoughtful. The kind of guy who always went out of his way to help a friend. On the 3rd of January 2020, Glenn Quinn was ambushed inside his home and beaten to death in an attack that left Carrickfergus stunned and shocked. But it wasn't the first time. Glenn Quinn is only the latest victim to lose his life at the hands of the Southeast Antrim UDA, one of the largest criminal cartels on the island of Ireland. Formed in 1971 from a number of loyalist vigilante groups, the Ulster Defence Association's stated aims were to protect Protestant communities from attacks by Irish Republican paramilitaries, and to keep Northern Ireland a part of the UK. At its height, the UDA commanded an estimated 40,000 members. But before long, the organization was justifying criminality and the murder of innocent people, often using its cover name, the Ulster Freedom Fighters.
Loyalist paramilitaries had burst in and shot dead 5 Catholics. The attack was carried out by the paramilitary group, the Ulster Freedom Fighters.
It wasn't until 1992 that the UDA was declared illegal by the British government. And as the Troubles ended in the early 2000s, the UDA's inner council began to fracture following a leadership battle between Southeast Antrim Brigadier John Grug Gregg and West Belfast Brigadier Johnny Mad Dog Adair.
I believe it'll only end when these so-called UDA criminal leaders stand down.
Their feud wouldn't end well, with John Gregg being murdered in 2003 and Johnny Adair's subsequent exile from Northern Ireland. After a few more years of internal feuding, the Southeast Antrim UDA was formally ousted from the mainstream organization in 2007 under the leadership of its new and current brigadier, Gary Fisher. Much like his predecessor, John Gregg, Gary Fisher has since allowed the Southeast Antrim UDA to flood the working-class Protestant communities they once promised to protect with drugs, extortion, and ruthless violence. The Southeast Antrim UDA controls roughly 20 miles of terrain from Larne to North Belfast. A recent intelligence assessment of the gang put its membership at 2,000, with access to illegal guns and heavy involvement in the drug supply, community coercion, intimidation, and other criminality that is understood to clear them £2.5 million a year. But what did any of that have to do with Glenn Quinn? Despite having no paramilitary connections himself, Quinn had been involved in a number of public altercations with a well-known Southeast Antrim man in the Woodburn estate. Most recently, Glenn made an offhand comment to a woman he thought was his friend in his own home. Glenn expressed criticism that the well-known Southeast Antrim man had attacked his friend's car business just days earlier. But unbeknownst to Glenn, that woman would forward Glenn's comment to that very individual. On the evening of Friday, January 3rd, 2020, Glenn Quinn entered his apartment building and walked down the hallway. When he opened his front door, Glenn was attacked by 3 members of the Southeast Antrim UDA and 1 dog. After forcing Glenn inside, the gang brutally beat him with baseball bats and an iron bar. Unable to defend himself, Glenn was left with massive facial and head injuries, 14 broken ribs, and more than 50 fractures in his chest alone. After letting their dog use the bathroom on Glenn's bed, the men robbed his pockets and left him there, cold and alone. Not believing his injuries to be life-threatening, Glenn called his brother Martin and a friend. In an account given to the Belfast Telegraph, the friend said, "Glenn told me they beat me with bats and bars. I asked who. The UDA, he said." Martin described his brother as sounding lucid and composed. He was the type of individual that hated putting anybody out. He didn't realize how injured he was.
I said, "Look, do we need to start thinking about an ambulance?" Glenn was no. He was quite lucid. And by no means did I think that Glenn had been assaulted so badly as he had been.
The following day, Glenn's friend reported being concerned for his safety. Police officers responded and forced entry into the home, where they found Glenn Quinn's dead body.
He passed away lonely, cold, terrified, and it's an absolute disgrace.
A week after Glenn's murder, PSNI Chief Inspector Darren McCartney said, "Glenn was well known in Carrickfergus and had no known enemies and no reason that we are aware of for anyone to cause him harm. We know that Glenn was previously assaulted outside his home on the 29th of December, and while he wasn't badly injured, he was left frightened by this attack. We are working to establish if there is any link between that assault and the attack on Glenn a few days later when he sustained a blunt force trauma that resulted in his death." Months later, Martin Quinn told the BBC News that it was beyond belief the PSNI failed to act based on the intelligence it had, adding that a senior officer revealed to the family that the PSNI had information Glenn was going to be attacked. This information was never passed on, the threat played out, and Glenn Quinn was murdered for speaking his opinion. Since Glenn Quinn was killed, his brother and 78-year-old mother have received a catalog of death threats, telling them to leave Northern Ireland or face being shot. But in a recent interview, Ellen Quinn said, "I'm here to stay. No one will put me out of my home or put me out of my country." But it's 3 years later, and the question remains, who killed Glenn Quinn? 41-year-old Colin Sims was arrested and questioned in the immediate aftermath of Glenn Quinn's murder. Sims, a convicted killer who previously served a prison sentence for causing death by dangerous driving, was also a member of the Southeast Antrim UDA. 5 days before his murder, Glenn Quinn had complained to family and friends that he was being harassed by Sims, the UDA's main enforcer in the Woodburn estate. Just 2 years before Quinn's death, Colin Sims was kneecapped by the gang for demanding extra cash from drug dealers already paying the Southeast Antrim's tax. But once he was back on his feet, the Southeast Antrim UDA would unfortunately continue to use Sims to intimidate rivals in Carrickfergus. While Colin Sims has never been charged with Glenn Quinn's murder, he remains inextricably linked to the barbaric act and the scrutiny it put the Southeast Antrim UDA under. So much so that in the summer of 2020, Brigadier Gary Fisher officially expelled Sims from the gang. Sims maintains his innocence, telling the Belfast Telegraph's Sunday Life, "I am willing to take a lie detector test of your choosing and answer questions of yours, so long as your paper prints the results and tells the truth. I am 100% innocent." Glenn Quinn is the 15th person to lose his life at the hands of the Southeast Antrim UDA since 1996. Of those 15 murders, 13 of the cases remain unsolved, and 6 of the victims were beaten to death. While it's difficult enough to believe that a paramilitary gang could so openly exist in a modern first world society, equally notable is the lack of forensic evidence in these crimes and the police's response to it. Despite Carrickfergus being a relatively small town of 28,000, there does seem to be a real problem with the Southeast Antrim UDA and their relationship with the police. Cross-community violence may have slowed down in Northern Ireland, but loyalist paramilitary control never stopped, nor did the roll call of unsolved murders.